Okay, so the reason I actually started to be engaged with CFGA is actually through the communications. So, I was going to sit down and write a communications plan, and that was going to be it, supposedly. So this is a little bit, I have to warn everyone because this is a little bit backwards in the way it normally gets done. So there was a strategic goals and vision. And that is what I based this communications plan on. So this was pretty much completed by June of 2021, and it was approved by the board. That first draft was approved by the board, I believe, in September. And then we were kind of midway through that other strategic planning process. So it's, really, we need to come back to this now so it can be absolutely sure to flow right from that new strategic plan. But luckily it's not that far off. We're just actually moving the needle forward on most stuff. So there could be a few inconsistencies, is what I'm trying to say. So February 2021, I began planning. So that's a lot of gathering and going through all the communications materials, looking at them, evaluating them. And I do something called a communications audit. And it was very clear that there was a lot of brand guidelines or brand usage, I guess, that was kind of a little bit a scattered approach. So we thought maybe just a solid document just to do the brand guidelines. Just so someone they knew what fonts, they knew what colors, they knew the logos, how to use them. And in a way it's covering, it's managing that risk, that brand risk. So we completed those two things in March, April. I came midway through the process, discussed with the board the messaging. So everything that I saw, all the things that were going well, maybe needed to improve, discussed the messaging. They approved it, said that I was on track. And then I ended up finalizing tactics, stakeholders, and kind of all the nitty gritty details. And then, like I said, in September, presented the complete plan to the board. So yeah, we were right on track. So when I do a communications audit, I look through tactics. So I look to see that colors, logos, they're all consistent, those sorts of details. Messaging is consistent. Then I look at the audience and tactic analysis. And so that's really, sometimes you can have something that's created that can be used for more than one audience. And in that regard, that it's really important to identify those things, and to make sure that every tactic, that's where the expense is in creating that tactic. So if you can use it more than one time, if you can use it over multiple channels, or multiple audiences, it saves the organization money in the long run. So I did one of those, and communication strategy analysis, just looking at the big, broad scope of things, and how those communications are implemented and if they're strategic. And where CFGA did really well on this one is actually their conference and the media presence. Media presence for CFGA, I think, they're doing really well. It's not too much, and it's not too little, definitely. And there's a really strong relationship with the media, but it's a fair relationship. So well done, Trudy and Allison. And then a communication SWOT. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, just where we can kind of shore up some of, the weaknesses and the threats and leverage our opportunities and our strengths, like media. So set out some basic goals for the communications. Once again, these flow from the overall strategy. I was looking through this and I can't see it changing too much in the next couple of years, just because this will take some work to systemize. So we want to identify and acquire essential resources to meet the operational goals of the organization. So when I say resources, that can mean dollars. That's an obvious one, but it can mean time. It can mean participants. It can mean information. So there's can mean data. So we're having those conversations around IP and Creative Commons and things like that. And so you will often have different organizations that have different resources that if you can line up and match, it can be a beautiful thing. And so that's where we kind of use communications as that conduit to get that done. We also obviously want to communicate the value of CFGA and ACPF. Now, I think forages, I actually started in forages in sales for Pickseed, and I actually think it's the most humble of all the crops. I say to Cedric, it's the Cinderella, because I just find it's a really humble industry. And so I think this can be sometimes tough. We see actually other groups doing it for the forage industry as much, or they're trying to leverage that. So anyway, so we definitely want to communicate that ourselves. We want to incorporate feedback loops in the current distribution channels. So we want to, I'm sure many of you have heard, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, and it actually applies to communications. You should be listening as much, if not double, of what you're putting out there. And so we have to have those ways to allow for information to flow in. Number one, because it's strategic. So if you don't have a way to get someone raises a red flag or they have an issue with something. So Grant just talked about research, right? That's a good point. Why we need to make sure that we have that information flowing out, and how do we do that? And how do we do that so we can do it quickly? So those are the kinds of questions that I'm curious and interested about, and about how we can do that better. So, and then understand the network and the stakeholder profiles, so we can effectively reach our audiences. This industry is very well networked and connected. It's big, but it's small. And so we just need to understand, what different projects are being worked on. And I think actually in this regard, we do quite well. And by we, I mean, for the most part, Cedric and the board. And I guess the general managers meeting, there's lots that I find when I attend those meetings too, that comes up. So that's one great way. And we just need to do that more. We just need to understand that a little bit better. And then prepare the organization on a multitude of issues to manage potential crisis. And so this is where I think the board and actually the general managers meetings could really help with this, where, all of those members are on the ground, they see things are popping up. So it's very similar to the strategic planning process that I took, but if we do that regularly at the board, where there's maybe a time where Cedric and the board have these little powwows of what are you seeing, what's out there, like almost like an informal environmental scan, then maybe we can identify potential issues, right? Is there a disease that affects alfalfa? Is there a shortage of a certain type of forage seed? Is there a distribution issue? All of those sorts of things, as an organization, we should start to get, the pulse of, and then, we can basically create a what if scenario to be able to respond to it if things like that come up. So there's lots of strategies within the communications plan, and I didn't put them all here because I thought we'd be here all day. But we have some general strategies that go across all of our programs, basically integrating, making sure that we're leveraging all of our programs. We've got grassland, the grassland inventory, and we've got some protocol, and we've got HBAT, and all of these different programs that actually work very well together. So let's make sure we're reaching out to those audiences, for all three of those things, those sorts of things. Bilingual strategies, that comes straight from the strategic plan. And it's really important that we start making as much as possible bilingual. International, national, and provincial strategy. These are all slightly different, and depending on the bucket of resources we have for them, you always set your budget first with marketing, because I could spend all day. Even, I'm sure I say it all the time, I'm sure there's people at Coca-Cola marketing that would like to do more. So, you set your budget and you work within that. You set your timelines and you work within that. So it's not the tail wagging the dog on this one. So yeah, for example, like the provincial strategies, you might have more actually feedback channels, so we can actually, hear what's going on the ground provincially, and it might be different, it might be the same. Then we have our national strategies, where we can kind of go as a collective group, and then internationally, right now we're working in the export side of things, and I don't see that changing. And how do we do that? And how do we do that as best as possible? When we have trade missions, let's put our best face forward on that one. Okay, so this is a blurry picture, and I was going to try and redo it before this, but I didn't have the time. But I wanted to put this in here so you understand the basic idea of around the communications process. There's so many of these different diagrams, and they're slightly different. But basically, you have your sender, which would be CFGA. We would create a tactic, and then we would, put it on Facebook or on our website or in an email. And so that's your media. And you've probably all heard the media is the message, or medium is the message. And that is very true. So part of the reason why I wanted to put this up is because CFGA is creating, so the HBAT, for example, the Habitat and Biodiversity and Assessment tool that is being developed, that is the tactic, that is the message, that's the medium. It's pretty much the whole package. And then on top of that, they get a report, which is another part of that. And they're interacting, so there's a feedback loop in that. So things can get, with digital technology, we're really coming into an era where things are changing. It's not just, I'm going to write a postcard, I'm going to put it in the mail, and I'm going to send it to my customer, where it's all very neat and tidy. So, doing something like the Habitat and Biodiversity and Assessment tool, that's a really interesting piece there. Number one, because CFGA, it's not Facebook. CFGA has their website, and they've got this HBAT tool, and we're working on a learning management system. So all those three things, for example, they technically own. They own that. They own the domain for CFGA. They, own these entities that are the channel as well. So that actually reduces your communications risk, because you have control. It does increase it in terms of if your website goes down and everyone's relying on you, that's a challenge too. But in some ways, if the algorithm changes for Google or Facebook or what have you, you still have your distribution channel right there. And then obviously we have the decoding and then the receiver. So the person receives that message. And then we have this thing called noise. That is all around, and I would actually argue with this this diagram that I see the noise is everywhere. It's at every single stage. But I guess we could debate that all day if anyone wants to debate me on communications theory. So in our messaging, we have a suite of messages that we've created. This is where I think the consistency needs to come, going back to that strategic plan that I just presented. So, but we have a master narrative, which is kind of a broader, more general paragraph, positioning statement, the organizational key message. So this is the one that everyone, all the internal stakeholders and the contractors, they would stand behind. We've got products and services, key messages for advocacy, education, development, research, conservation. And then if a project warrants it, we may do a separate key message for them. But oftentimes when I'm looking at them, they can fall into one of those areas. Once again, that's maybe where leadership we need to add something around leadership to that key message. And it seems like a lot of key messages, but really when you're dealing with different audiences, you need to pick and choose what the message is. And it's probably all consistent across everything, but anyways. So we also have the customer key message. So that's when I say customer in a nonprofit world, that's your participant, that's someone that's using your programs, your conference attendees, those sorts of people. Your members, this is often on the corporate side called the owner's key message. So what your boss is. So I actually split that owner's message up into members and funders. So that would be, your government agencies, or if you have sponsors or that sort of thing. So yeah, like I said, there's the different strategies that I have there. I might have put that slide in twice. And then we have campaign planning. So then we take all of that theory and all of the big strategy, and we start putting it we choose maybe a goal and an audience. So we kind of have an objective, and then we start working through the more detailed area of it. So we have the communications plan, and then we turn that into a campaign template that CFGA is using. And so that gets where it gets really specific, that it's, on this day, we're going to send out this information on that, or create a web page or whatever the piece is. And so that leads us right into brand. Maybe I'll stop there if anyone has any questions on that, and then I can get into the brand.
Questions or comments for Carlene on the brand? I'm seeing nothing in the chat here, Carlene. I've been keeping an eye, so.
Okay, I'll just roll right into the brand. So, like I said, we completed the brand. I should call it the visual identity. So your brand is a lot more than just, the font and the color. And so I like this quote because it talks about cause and effect. And so identity is cause, brand is effect, and the strength of the former influences the strength of the latter. So everyone in the organization impacts that brand. Anyone that is front facing and connecting with people, they affect the brand. And so I can do colors, fonts all day long. I like the logo, like we can have all of that. The website's great. But you need to have multiple pieces coming together. And so that's where some of the work that I don't even know if Melissa would consider it, but with her working on systems that allows for people to work more efficiently and effectively and respond, so that sets the brand, so that builds your culture, and kind of setting expectations and service standards and all those sorts of things can roll into this. And that is where I think the board in the coming years, I don't want to put it all on the board in the next 6 months, but in the coming years can really help steer and influence that culture. And then the image, that's obviously that's the visual identity. And then you have your vision. So, there's obviously CFGA is pretty obvious. We want to promote forages and grasslands in Canada, and present them in a good light. And we want to also manage risk for the industry as well, where there's problems and issues that could really affect producers. We want to be aware of those as well. So over the next few years, there's quite a bit of work that can still be done on brand development. We do have that brand identity, but that can be, or that visual identity, I should say, but that can all be worked in. So my hope would be that in 5 years, when it's time to do another strategic plan, that most of these steps have been worked through. And I think it's very easily done. given time, but if you pick 1 or 2 of these things off every quarter or every 6 months, there's no reason why it can't all be completed. And that's basically the brand piece of it. It's short and sweet. And it gets us to 11, or what is it? 2:30?
Right at 2:30. So not only did you deliver a clear and concise presentation with a lot of detail, also noting we started that in, I think, May, you said, right? So
Well, the communications was kind of started in February.
right.
Yeah.
So just over a year. That's a fairly substantial body of work to be pulling all that together. So thank you for that. So not only did she deliver a number of presentations clearly and concisely, but she actually got us back half an hour to our day. So thank you for that, Carlene. Any questions before we take a short break on the communication strategy or the brand, things that need to be considered, things that we've missed, things that we're doing well?
Just a comment, if I may, Cedric.
Indeed, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you. Sorry, showing up at the meeting a little late, guys. I just, like to thank Carlene and Cedric, for a tremendous amount of work they've been doing here. I think, from the board's perspective here, we've got some guidelines, some strategic plans going forward, and I think it's great. As an organization, we need to have that, and pointing us in the right direction. So, a lot of good stuff happening at CFGA, and with that, I commend everybody that's worked on that, and I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.